Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be taking a look at the human brain.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah. You sent over this YouTube video, an interview with a neuroscientist from the Let's podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's really packed with information, and I'm ready to dive in.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. I think one of the things that struck me is how this neuroscientist explains these complex processes in such simple terms.
Yeah.
And also how their perspective on behavior changed as they learned more and more about how the brain actually works.
Yeah, that's what I thought was so interesting, too, is how their perspective, evolved as they got deeper into the actual mechanics of the brain.
Yeah, and they come from a cognitive psychology background where you're focusing more on, thoughts and interpretations. But by studying the brain and how it actually works at a cellular level really changed their viewpoint.
Yeah, it seems like once they understood the, nuts and bolts of how the brain works.
Yeah.
It made them rethink some pretty fundamental ideas about human behavior.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, for example, they talk about action potential, which is this electrical signal that neurons use to communicate with one another.
So the brain's own internal messaging system.
Exactly. It's like an electrical system. And when you realize that everything that our brain does, from sensing a gentle breeze to composing a symphony, boils down to these electrical signals.
Wow.
It's a real game changer.
Yeah, so all of our thoughts and emotions and actions, everything that we experience as humans is ultimately a result of these electrical signals zipping around in our brains.
Yeah.
That's pretty mind-blowing.
It really is. And you think about it, our senses are constantly picking up information from the world around us, sights and sounds and smells and textures and temperatures.
Yeah.
But for our brain to make sense of all that, it needs to be translated into a language it understands. And that language is electrical signals.
So walk me through how that happens. So how does my brain turn the feeling of sand between my toes into an electrical signal?
Okay, so you have these specialized receptors in your skin that are designed to detect different types of sensory input, like pressure or temperature or pain.
Okay.
So when you step onto the beach and feel that sand, those pressure receptors in your feet are activated. And that triggers a cascade of events that leads to the generation of an electrical signal that travels up your nerves and into your brain.
So it's like a chain reaction. The sand stimulates the receptors. The receptors send a signal, and that signal goes to the brain where it says sand.
Exactly. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Not all of those signals reach our conscious awareness. There's a part of the brain called the thalamus that acts like a filter, determining which sensory information gets passed on to the cortex, where conscious awareness happens.
That makes sense, because otherwise we'd just be overwhelmed by a constant barrage of sensory input all the time.
Right.
Like the brain has its own spam filter.
Exactly. And it's actually this filtering process that some researchers believe might be involved in ADHD.
Oh, really?
The idea is that in people with ADHD, the thalamus may be less efficient at filtering out irrelevant sensory information, which could contribute to difficulties with attention and focus.
Wow. So our ability to, just concentrate on one thing is tied to how our brain filters incoming information.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. And this neuroscientist also dives into the debate between cognitivism and behavioralism.
Yes, they do.
Right. And this is where I think you were talking about how the neuroscientists kind of shifted their perspective.
Exactly.
A little bit.
This is where that shift comes in.
So just for those of us who haven't taken, Psychology 101.
Sure.
Can we break down the difference between cognitivism and behavioralism?
Of course. So cognitivism focuses on internal mental processes. So things like thoughts, beliefs, memories, and interpretations. It's all about how we process information and make sense of the world around us. Behavioralism takes a different approach. It concentrates on observable behaviors and the environmental factors that influence those behaviors.
So it's less about what's happening inside the mind and more about what we can see and measure in terms of actions and responses.
Exactly. And for this neuroscientist, their deep dive into the brain's mechanisms, especially the role of electrical signals and how they're triggered by external stimuli, led them to question the dominance of the cognitive perspective.
So they started to see how much of our behavior might actually be driven by factors outside of our conscious control.
Right.
And that must have been like a big shift in their thinking.
Yeah, and they illustrate this with a simple example.
Oh.
The decision to drink water.
Okay.
So on the surface, it seems like a conscious choice.
Right, I'm thirsty, so I'll grab a glass of water.
Right.
Yeah.
But from a behavioral perspective, that choice is actually triggered by biological needs, like dehydration,
Okay.
and environmental cues, like seeing a glass of water.
So like my brain is responding to these internal and external signals, and then the action of drinking water is almost like an automatic response.
Exactly. And even if you try to resist the urge to drink,
Right.
that resistance itself is shaped by past experiences and their consequences.
Hold on, I gotta like wrap my head around this for a second.
Sure.
Are you saying that even something as simple as drinking water
Yeah.
is driven by factors outside of our conscious control?
That's what this neuroscientist's research suggests.
Wow.
They argue that our brains are constantly receiving input from our bodies and from the environment, and this input triggers a chain of electrical and chemical events
Right.
that ultimately shape our behavior.
So this is really making me rethink the whole concept of free will.
Right.
Like if so much of our behavior is influenced by factors that we're not even aware of, then what does that mean for our ability to actually make choices?
It's a profound question, and one that philosophers and scientists have been grappling with for centuries.
Right.
But this is exactly where things get interesting, because they don't say that we have no free will,
Okay.
but they challenge our traditional notions of how it works and where it comes from. I think it's tempting to think, okay, so my brain is basically running the show, and I'm just along for the ride.
Right, yeah.
But that's not the whole story. This research doesn't lead to a sense of helplessness.
Okay.
In fact, it can be incredibly empowering.
Empowering. How is that empowering? Like if all of my actions are just automatic responses to stimuli, how can I change anything?
Well, that's where the incredible plasticity of the brain comes in.
Okay.
Neuroplasticity refers to the brain's ability to change and adapt throughout life. So you're not stuck with a fixed set of neural pathways. Your experiences, your actions, your choices, they all have the power to shape and reshape those pathways.
So even if like my brain is wired to respond to certain triggers in a particular way,
Yeah.
I can actually like rewire it through my actions and experiences.
Exactly. And this is one of the key insights from this neuroscientist you're interested in. Instead of getting bogged down in trying to change your thoughts directly,
Okay.
a behavioral approach focuses on modifying your behaviors and, in turn, reshaping your experiences.
Can you give me like a concrete example of how this might work in real life?
Sure, let's imagine you struggle with anxiety in social situations.
Okay.
This neuroscientist's research would suggest that your brain has learned to associate social situations with certain negative feelings or experiences,
Okay.
leading to those anxious responses.
Right.
So a behavioral approach would focus on helping you gradually rewire those associations.
So instead of me like trying to convince myself that I shouldn't be anxious,
Right.
I could focus on changing my behaviors in those social situations.
Exactly, and it might involve things like practicing relaxation techniques, setting small, achievable goals for social interactions, or gradually exposing yourself to those situations in a safe and controlled environment.
So that sounds a lot like exposure therapy.
You got it. Exposure therapy is a powerful tool for rewiring those anxious associations.
Right.
The idea is that by repeatedly and safely confronting the things that trigger your anxiety, your brain learns that they're not actually dangerous.
This is making me think about the neuroscientists' own journey, how they went from a cognitive perspective, focus on like, the power of thoughts, to a more behavioral perspective focused on actions and experiences.
Yeah.
So was it like a complete rejection of the cognitive approach or more of an integration?
That's a great question. It seems like more of an integration.
Okay.
A recognition that both perspectives hold valuable insights. They still acknowledge the importance of thoughts and feelings,
Right.
but they see them as products of the brain's activity, those electrical signals we talked about earlier.
So it's not about saying that thoughts don't matter.
Right.
It's about understanding that they're part of a larger system, influenced by both internal and external factors.
Exactly, and this neuroscientist uses a great analogy to explain this. They talk about how we still use words like mind and thoughts,
Right.
even though on a fundamental level, everything boils down to those electrical and chemical processes in the brain.
So they're like metaphors.
Yeah.
Ways of describing these complex processes
Yes.
in
Yeah.
a way that we can understand.
We need language to communicate and make sense of our experiences,
Right.
but it's important to remember that language is just a representation of the underlying reality.
Okay.
And this understanding has practical implications for how we approach personal growth and therapy.
So, like, give me an example. How might this understanding change the way we think about therapy?
Well, instead of solely focusing on exploring thoughts and feelings in therapy, a behavioral perspective might incorporate techniques that target behavior change directly.
Okay.
Things like setting up reward systems for desired behaviors, practicing mindfulness to become more aware of triggers,
Okay.
or even making changes to your environment to support those new behaviors.
So it's about taking like a more holistic approach,
Yeah.
recognizing that our thoughts and behaviors and environment are all interconnected and influence each other.
Exactly. And this understanding can be incredibly empowering because it gives you a sense of agency. You're not just a passive recipient of your thoughts and feelings.
Right.
You have the power to actively shape your experiences and in turn reshape your brain.
This is really fascinating.
Yeah.
But it also raises some ethical considerations, doesn't it? If we can like understand how the brain works and use that knowledge to influence behavior, couldn't that be used for manipulative purposes?
That's a crucial point. Like any powerful tool, this knowledge can be used for good or for ill.
Right.
Think about advertising, for example.
Okay.
Advertisers are masters at using psychological techniques to tap into our brain's reward system and influence our purchasing decisions.
So they're like hacking our brains
Yeah.
to get us to buy their product.
Kinda, yeah.
It feels a little unsettling to think about it that way.
It is a bit unsettling, but it also highlights the importance of being aware of these techniques and developing critical thinking skills to resist manipulation.
This makes me think about like the potential impact of this research on fields like education and parenting.
Yeah.
If we can understand how kids' brains develop and how their behaviors are shaped, we can create learning environments that are more effective and supportive.
Absolutely. Understanding the brain's plasticity and its responsiveness to environmental cues can have profound implications for how we approach education, parenting, and even social policy.
Wow, this deep dive has really been an eye-opener.
Yeah.
We've explored the, intricacies of brain function, the debate between cognitivism and behavioralism, the power of neuroplasticity, and even, the ethical considerations of using this knowledge.
Yeah.
So, like, what's the most important takeaway you hope people will walk away with?
For me, the key message is this. You are not simply a product of your genes or your past experiences. You have the power to shape your own brain and, in turn, shape your own destiny by understanding how your brain works. You can make more conscious choices, break free from limiting patterns, and create a life that aligns with your values and aspirations.
That's a powerful message to end on.
Yeah.
This deep dive has given us a lot to think about and a lot to explore further.
Absolutely.
And if you're interested in learning more about this neuroscientist's work, be sure to check out the Lutz podcast interview you shared with us. And remember, your brain is an incredible tool. Use it wisely. This deep dive has me thinking about all the different ways that we can apply this knowledge about the brain to our own lives.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost like we've been given this incredible tool, this amazing adaptable brain, and now we're finally starting to learn how to use it to its full potential.
I love that, and this neuroscientist you're following really emphasizes that point. They argue that understanding the brain's mechanics isn't about reducing us to a bunch of electrical signals.
Right.
It's about empowering us to make more conscious and intentional choices.
Yeah, so it's not about denying that, biology or genetics play a role in shaping who we are, but it's about recognizing that we have the power to influence those biological processes through our actions and experiences.
Exactly. They even talk about how this understanding can be applied to something as challenging as trauma recovery.
Oh, wow.
Remember how we were talking about the impact of past experiences on our behavior?
Yeah.
Well, their research suggests that while traumatic experiences can create these really deeply ingrained patterns in the brain, those patterns aren't necessarily permanent.
So even though trauma can leave a lasting mark, there's still hope for healing and transformation.
Absolutely. This neuroscientist believes that by understanding how trauma affects the brain, we can develop more effective therapies and interventions to help people rewire those negative patterns and create new, healthier ones.
That's really encouraging. It seems like this research offers a message of hope and possibility.
Yeah.
Like, even if we've been through difficult experiences, we're not doomed to be defined by them. We have the power to change and grow.
That's one of the most powerful aspects of this work. It's about recognizing the brain's incredible capacity for adaptation and healing. And that message of hope extends beyond individual experiences to encompass societal change as well.
What do you mean? How does this relate to broader societal issues?
Well, if we understand how environmental factors and social structures influence brain development and behavior,
Right.
we can start to create environments that foster well-being and resilience.
Okay.
This neuroscientist talks about the need for trauma-informed approaches in education, healthcare, and even the criminal justice system.
So it's about recognizing that people's behaviors are often a response to the environments that they're in.
Yeah,
And that by changing those environments, we can create a more just and equitable society.
precisely. It's about understanding the interconnectedness between individual brains and the social fabric that surrounds them.
You know, this deep dive has just been a real eye-opener. We've explored so much. The intricacies of brain function,
Yeah.
the debate between cognitivism and behavioralism, the power of neural plasticity,
Right.
and even, the ethical considerations of using this knowledge.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is so. So what would you say is like the most important takeaway you hope people will walk away with from this deep dive?